there's fishing, and then there's fly fishing. Fly fishing is awesome. Any fly fishermen out there? 1, 2, 3. Oh, we got a husband and wife couple fly fisher, man and woman. And Morgan back here, I know he's a fly fisherman. Fly fishing, I got into that some years ago, and it's an amazing way to fish because it takes a lot of skill in order to throw that line out, to present the fly just right, and to know the exact fly that the fish are biting on, the hatch that is occurring on the stream that you're on, and which could be just one stream with a certain kind of bug. And you got to have this knowledge in order to reach those fish. And I love fly fishing, but one of the things that I learned as I was fly fishing is that if I was to wear polarized glasses, I could see oftentimes beyond the sheen on the surface. And down underneath, where you can see those fish just sitting there like this. And so you know where to cast the line and exactly how you want to present it. You know, if they're faced upstream, you know, you can let it come and drift down towards them and so on. But seeing underneath the surface is very helpful when you're fishing. And maybe you've fished before, other sorts of ways, and you've just gotten used to the feel when you get a bite, and you feel that little tug, and then you try to set the hook. You can't see what's going on, but you're in the midst of fishing. There's almost this element of faith involved, because there's no sight, yet there is trust, and there is that feeling. And so today's passage, I liken to that in a sense that when we are sharing the Word, it's like fishing. Jesus said He would make us fishers of men. As we cast out the Word, we don't know what's going on under the surface many times. But the passage that we're reading today is like Christ handing us a pair of polarized sunglasses in which we can see under the surface and we can understand what goes on under the surface in a crowd when the Word is being preached. And so this insight begins on the Sea of Galilee. In verse 1 of chapter 4 of Mark, it says, "Again he began to teach beside the sea, and a very large crowd gathered about him." Now notice the crowd is a large crowd. Crowds are exciting. There's something that just gets you pumped when you're packed in a room. When there's that energy and lots of people. That's oftentimes the first questions people ask these days. Oh, what church do you go to? Okay, I go to this church. How many people go there? Why is that such an important question? Why isn't the first question, what is taught there? What is the heart of the church? What is going on? What are you guys about? But no, it usually goes to that first question, how many people are there? Because we naturally tend towards a herd mentality, don't we? We want to be part of a herd. We want to be part of this group. We want to be one of the faces in the masses. We want to be surrounded by that electricity. Yet, what we see here with Christ is that He is not enthused about the large crowd. And He's actually going to give us insight into what's going on in the midst of the crowd. He's not deceived by the feeling of something amazing going on. So in a sense, the passage that we're reading today, Christ pulls back the thin veneer of reality to expose the pulsating heart of humanity. You can see the veins. You can see how things are working as He describes to us 4 types of people that are in a crowd when the Word is being preached. And so, Christ does away with that herd mentality and asks us to preach the Word, have the faith that He is going to bear the fruit, but understand that, according to this parable, if you're to take it straight across in terms of numbers that only 25% of any crowd is actually going to do something with what's being taught. Is actually going to be transformed, is actually going to produce fruit. And so it goes on, and a very large crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat in it on the sea, and the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. If you write in your Bible, circle land, because that word is the word soil. It's the same word that continues throughout this passage. I believe it occurs 9 times when we're talking about the different soils. And so Mark is very clear. The people are standing on the soil. Christ is like the sower throwing out the seed on the soil. Now let's see what happens. And he was teaching them many things in parables. And in his teaching, he said to them. Now, when you see the word parable there, maybe you've heard the old definition over the years that a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And that is kind of true, but I would like to redefine it. Because as we'll see in the passage today, it becomes clear what the parables actually do. And that is this. A parable is a heavenly mystery veiled with an earthly story. A heavenly mystery veiled with an earthly story. That'll make sense a little later. Okay? So on the surface, a parable has a mystery behind it. How are you going to get beyond the veil and then understand what that mystery is? In verses 3 through 9, now we see this parable presented. And Christ starts off with what? First thing he says, first word out of his mouth. Listen. All right. So listen. That's what he said. Now, in the Jewish Shema in Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, it starts with the same idea. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And it goes on. And so Christ is using that same thing. Listen, hear. Not just with your ears, but let it go down deeper. And then he goes and he uses another word, behold. So listen deals with your ears, goes down to your heart. Behold deals with your eyes. He's saying, look. And now he describes a story. A sower went out to sow. And as we'll see, this sower is not super efficient in the way that he's sowing. He does the old broadcast method of sowing where you have this satchel with seed, you'll grab it and just throw it in front of you. And it will land wherever it will. And wherever it grows, that's where it's going to grow. There's not a lot of science to it. There's just a lot of faith to it. And so the sower sows, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. And other seed fell onto good soil, and it produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And he said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now at that point, there's no interpretation, there's no explanation of what he means. And so the disciples, as we read through this passage at the beginning, maybe you picked that up, the disciples at this point are scratching their heads. I don't know what that means. They are lost. If you've gone to church before, you've probably heard this parable before, so you have a little bit of insight into what it means. But the initial crowd that Jesus first teaches us to are lost. You ever feel like that in church before? Where you're sitting there and you're like, I have no idea what that guy's talking about. All I hear is, just like the peanuts. Sometimes it feels like that. That's what the crowds are feeling. That's what the disciples are feeling at this point. But it's Jesus teaching. I would have loved to have been in that crowd where Jesus was sitting on a boat and the electricity of the crowd was there and you could hear Christ teach. I don't even care if I understood it. I just want to hear his voice, and it would have just been fun, right? And that's probably what this whole crowd was thinking. Isn't this neat? Do you understand what he's saying? No, but this feels really cool. I love it. I'm going to come back. In verse 10, it goes on. Oh, and before we hit verse 10, so, as we look at the parable, there's 4 types of soil that he talks about. Number 1's the path. Number 2 is the rocks. Number 3 is the thorns. And number 4 is good soil. When you get to the good soil, the good news is that good soil produces a crop 30 times, 60 times, 100 times what was initially sown, like a miraculous multiplication that is going on. And so 4 types of soil. Now, verse 10 through 12 seems like a big jolt to this whole thing, and maybe it's like, what? This doesn't seem very nice. This kind of ruins the romance of the whole fun listening to Jesus on the seashore thing. And it says, and when he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked him about the parables, and he said to them, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. Now, I want to point out that word secret. Again, if you are writing in your Bible, circle it. Secret is the Greek word mysterion. We get our word mystery from that. A mysterion is a truth that is completely unknown and hidden, yet when it is revealed to you, it is easy to grasp. Even a caveman can do it. So even a child could understand it. That's what a mysterion is. So Jesus says, I'm going to reveal to you the mystery, the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. And so remember that definition of what a parable is. It's a heavenly mystery veiled with an earthly story. And now you understand why. This secret of the kingdom of heaven, but for those outside, everything is in parables. So now he creates this distinction between those outside the kingdom and those inside the kingdom. Those inside the kingdom are given an understanding which those on the outside do not have. There's a special instruction. There's an opening of the eyes. There's a reception of the heart in those of the kingdom. And then it says in verse 12, so that they may indeed see, but not perceive, and may indeed hear, but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. Well, this is a quote from Isaiah, and it seems really weird that Jesus would say, listen and look, and then he explains that I say things in parables so people can hear it, but they won't understand it. Is this some weird trick that God is doing? I mean, I don't get it. Well, there's 2 things to understand in what's being said here. The first is that for the nation of Israel as a whole, as we see in the book of John, chapter 1, verse 11, that he came to those who were his own, but his own did not receive him. He came to the Jews, and as a nation as a whole, they rejected Jesus as their Messiah. Now, the passage that's being quoted in Isaiah, the original context, is of the Israelites hardening their heart, not obeying the Lord, continuing to go their own way, going astray, like sheep that keep going astray, and they won't listen to their shepherd. And so this statement is a statement of judgment. Because you've continued to harden your heart, I am now going to make your heart even harder through the teaching of Isaiah. Every time they heard Isaiah preach, because they continually rejected God, God says, now your heart will become harder and harder and harder. Sometimes that used to freak me out as a youth pastor when I knew I was teaching to kids that were in the youth group whose parents made them go and they didn't want to hear. And so every time I taught, I can sense them getting harder and harder and harder. I almost didn't want them to listen because I knew that the more they heard, the more they hardened their heart. And I would just pray for them. Lord, do something amazing before they get so hard they won't listen anymore. And that's what happened actually with the religious leaders that rejected Christ. The more they saw in terms of miracles, the more that they heard in terms of His teaching, they continually hardened their heart. And so we see that same thing happening in Christ's day. There's a context in Isaiah that is true in Jesus' day as well. But to those inside the kingdom, that's not true. To those who received the message and received the word, that verse isn't true. But for those on the outside that continually reject it, that verse is true. But there's a second aspect to that I want to make clear, is that any mystery concerning the kingdom, no one can understand unless God opens your eyes. It's a mystery. So human wisdom cannot unveil the mystery. You are not smart enough, you are not wise enough, you don't have enough experience, whatever you may rely on in order to define what is truth. We're mere human beings, and God must reveal to us who He is, or else you invent a God in your own mind. You define who He is, and usually when people try to define who God is in their own mind, they make a God who's like them. And so instead what we see is we need God to reveal who He is to us because He's completely other, totally different from anything we've ever experienced before and anything that we can make up in our own minds. And such is true of all the truths of the kingdom of God. And so in verse 13, I love this. It says, and He said to them, He's saying to His group of disciples, the 12, and a other larger group of followers that are apart from the masses. They've left the giant concert field, and now they're like in a campfire field or a living room field. And He says to them, do you not understand this parable? And they're all shaking their heads, nope, we didn't get it. How then will you understand all the parables? Well, and the truth is, Jesus, we can't understand it unless you reveal it to us. And we see this truth brought out in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians 2, verses 9 through 10, it says this, but as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. And so it's the Spirit of God that opens our eyes and illuminates the Word, that we might see it. If you were to jump down to Mark 4:33, we see something else here in this passage that says this, with many such parables, He spoke the word to them, and they were able to hear it, or as they were able to hear it. He did not speak to them without a parable, but privately to His own disciples He explained everything. Thank God. I wonder what they went through every time when they were hearing a story they didn't understand. What is He saying now? I don't get it. It's okay. Don't worry. Tonight, when we're eating dinner, He'll explain it. Cool. And can you imagine the hearts of the disciples at dinner time just waiting for that time to sit down and say, Jesus, now you got to tell me, what was that about? What a special thing. In verse 14, now we see the description, the explanation. The sower sows the word, and these are the ones along the path where the word is sown. When they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. Now, the first example we're given here is of the seed that falls on the path. Now, it's summertime. Maybe some of you guys have gone camping. I love going camping. I love being out in the wilderness. Not so much living in tents, maybe a motorhome. But walking around is great when you find that path and it's beaten down and there's no plants. The soil becomes hard. And not only is it hard so a seed wouldn't necessarily penetrate it, but it also gets trampled on. So it's not a place to grow wheat. It's a place birds keep an eye out for so that when seed does fall on it, they can fly down and snatch it right up. So the path here that's being talked about, Jesus reveals, it's those in that big crowd that are there to hear Jesus, but as soon as they hear it, their heart's hard, and they say, I don't believe it. And Satan is like the bird that comes down and snatches it away. Now, I can relate with that birds being like Satan thing, because I have a garden, and I have a couple of a couple of cherry trees. And man, there's this huge gang of crows. I call it a gang. I know a group of crows is called a murder. I don't know if you guys knew that. A murder of crows. I call it a gang. It flies over from Tacoma and it strips my tree bare of cherries. Like every time I'm like, okay, I got to get out there in the morning and get the red ones. You know, those birds have picked all the red ones clean. And they leave the green ones. I mean, little jerks, you know. But birds, if you're a farmer, birds are not your friend. That's why Satan's likened to a bird here. When people harden their hearts, Satan is involved in that process. You know, there's a spiritual battle happening when the word's taught. The ones that would fall into this category are those religious leaders that we just read about at the end of chapter 3 that attributed Christ's miracles to the power of Beelzebub. Their heart was so hard, they said, you know, it's so miraculous, it's so supernatural, it must be Satan. And you can see how Satan brings in the lie and deceives and then leads astray. In verse 16, and these are the ones sown on rocky ground. The ones who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy. And when they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while, then when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. And so we see the soil that is rocky, and when the seed hits it, as soon as it hits, it quickly springs up. And Jesus says it's like those in the crowd that receive it with joy. Maybe there's a lot of tears, maybe there's a lot of exuberance, yet they don't allow the truth of the word, they don't allow Jesus himself to settle down and make himself at home in their heart. And so there's no root. And persecution is bound to come. Once you take a stand for Jesus, your friends are going to be like, what are you doing? Your family are going to be like, what are you joining this cult for? And the world, you're not going to find a lot of support from the world if you decide to follow Christ. So that persecution's going to come, and instead of enduring, what happens is the persecution's like the sun that beats down on that poor little plant with no roots that can't get down to the water, and it just gets burned up. When you don't let the truth sink down deep, persecution will scare you off. Verse 18, and others are the ones sown among thorns. They are those who hear the word, But the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. The thorns are nasty little things that, although the word gets planted and then the roots go down, there are things on the surface that attack that plant and keep it from being fruitful. And in those things, Jesus describes them as thorns. They wrap themselves around a healthy plant and begin to choke it out. And those thorns are the cares of this life. We get so caught up in worrying about money. And they're also called the desires. Other desires, it says. Desires for everything else other than following Christ begin to vie for your attention. Begin to compete for your commitment. And then in the midst of that, faith begins to dwindle. And our lives become about other things. And Jesus becomes one of the many things that we add in there. Instead of being like the center of our life, He's like Pluto floating out there. We're not even sure if He's a planet or not, you know? Just something we add in. So that's the third kind of person that's out in the crowd. But then there's the fourth that he talks about in verse 20. But those that were sown on the good soil are the ones who hear the word and accept it or receive it and bear fruit 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And so we see here the great distinction in this good soil is that they actually bear fruit. They actually obey the word that's planted in them. It goes from being in their heart to being true of their words, of their actions, of their attitudes, everything that they are. They become about Jesus Christ. And what ends up happening as a result? Well, there ends up being reproduction. A sign of a true disciple. As we've talked about in the book of Mark, we learn in chapter 1, verse 17, that we follow Christ, we're followers, and we're fishers of men, we're fishers. Followers and fishers. If you're truly a disciple, that should be true of your life. And so what happens? We become part of the 25%, if you will, that is actually producing 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. Fruitfulness is a part of our nature. That's how you know you have healthy wheat. You end up with the kernels that ripen, and they're ready to be used for whatever the master would want to use that for, whether it be more seed to grow more fruit, or whether it be to make bread or whatever else. We become useful in the hands of God. Now, as we read something like this, it's easy to get caught up in the, which one am I? Easy answer, time will tell. There are some that may think they're the good soil, and they find out, well, I was in the rocky soil. Some that thought they were in the thorns and realize, whoa, I'm actually in the good soil, and God is now using me and doing amazing things. We now are left with that personal assessment. Where am I in the midst of this? There's the application of, if you're like Christ and you're sharing the truth, you're sharing the word, you can guarantee there's 4 types of listeners. Don't get freaked out when 75% of the people walk away. If Jesus had that kind of odds or statistics, who are we to think we're going to do any better? But at the same time, if we're the listeners, then are we listening? Well, I'm going to encourage you with this idea that there's an open opportunity to respond and not be one of the 3 soils that doesn't produce. And that open opportunity is here today. It's I think, exemplified well in this other parable that I want to read to you in Matthew 21. And this one's pretty short little parable. Matthew 21, verse 28. It's about two sons. Dads, if you've asked your kids to do chores around the house, you can relate with this one. It says, what do you think? A man had two sons, and he went to the first and said, son, go and mow the lawn. Or wait, no. It says, go and work in the vineyard today. And he answered, I will not. But afterwards, he changed his mind and went. So get that. He said no, and then he felt convicted. He said, you know what? I better be better to my dad than that. I'll show up and do it. In verse 30, and he went to the other son and said the same. And he answered, I go, sir, but did not go. Which of the two did the will of the Father? The guy that said, I'm going to go do this for you, Dad. I'm going to take care of that vineyard and make it the best vineyard. Yeah, he's so excited. And then he never shows up. Or the guy that says, no, Dad, I'm in a bad mood. I've got better things to do, and then is convicted and comes back. Which one does the will of the Father? Well, obviously, it's the one that said no and then showed up. And you might be that person. As you read the parable of the soil, and it reveals to you where you're at, maybe you're the son or the daughter that's been resisting and saying no, and then you're the one that goes back and says, okay, Jesus, I'm ready. I want to follow you. I want to be fruitful in my walk. And that's pleasing to the Father. The one who was dishonorable, who comes back and says, I'm so sorry. That's so pleasing to God. But the Pharisees are the ones that were like, hey, I'm doing all the right stuff, but then they rejected the Messiah. So wherever you're at today, don't get bummed out and discouraged by this parable, but rather see it as the opportunity, the wake-up call to be convicted and get back to it. You know, when we look at various men in the Scripture, in various groups of people, we can see each type of these four soils get redeemed. You see Paul, who was the arch persecutor of the church, he rejected Christ and Christianity wholeheartedly, yet God met him on the road to Damascus when he was going to kill some more Christians or put some more into prison. And Jesus met him on the road and blinded him. But at the same time, his eyes spiritually were opened and he understood. You see, his heart was hard and he was going the wrong way. Yet God was able to redeem that. Then you have Peter. Peter, this guy that said, hey, we'll die before we deny you. And around a fire, at the challenge of a little servant girl that said, hey, aren't you one of his disciples? He freaked out. No, I'm not one of them. He got scared. Big old Peter got scared of a little girl. Persecution came, and he ran. Maybe you're in that place, but what did Jesus do? He reinstated Peter. Feed my sheep. You know, Peter was forgiven. He was put back into a place of being used greatly by God. Then, in the New Testament, we have the church of Laodicea. In the book of Revelation, we see they were saying, we've got everything we need. We got money, we got gold, we got, cool houses and awesome chariots or whatever it may have been. And God said, hey, you guys don't realize that you're blind, pitiful, naked, and poor spiritually. And then there's that famous verse that we often read, and this is Christ's call to you. It says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If thorns are choking out your life, the cares of this world, the desires of wealth and all that stuff, Jesus is faithful to continue to knock. And he says, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. Instead of this parable bringing condemnation, let it be something that not only encourages you as you're sharing about Jesus, but also brings you to that place in experiencing the grace of God afresh this morning. Because the God I know in the Bible redeems people that it got caught up into each types of those soils. So you might be here today feeling beat down and defeated, shamed, whatever it is, but Christ is knocking. Let me back in, and I'm going to make your life awesome. And if that's where you're at today, maybe you haven't been following, maybe you haven't been fishing, there's not a lot of fruit in your life, then respond to Him now. Let's pray. Wherever you're at, respond to Him with true faith, with your whole heart. Lord Jesus, I thank You for being a gracious God who continues to pursue me when I'm unfruitful. Lord, when I have failed like Peter, when I've been hard and mean like Paul, or when I've been caught up in other things like the Laodiceans. Lord, I surrender those things to You now, and I thank You for Your grace and Your kindness, and I respond by placing my whole life in Your hands. Lord, pull out the weeds, remove the rocks, plow up the fallow ground, and do amazing things for Your glory. We just open up everything, God, our relationships, our finances, our friendships, our very lives this whole summer, and ask that You would come into it all. We receive You as our Lord and Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.